So the first thing we had to do as a school was to decide when the time was right for us to carry out the SNSA. For us as a school and a relatively new management team, I had only been in post for a year and a half, we felt that the sooner we did them the better, because we wanted the information from the assessments. As in most schools, the last term is always quite busy, so we decided to go for April, which was quite early on. So April for us seemed a quiet month within the school calendar. So as a school, we treated the SNSA as the same way we would any other assessments. The parents were made aware that the SNSA would be carried out through a newsletter, because obviously there was so much coverage about the assessments. In no way did any parent come in, did anybody withdraw their child from the assessments, and we didn't report specifically back on the SNSA to parents. When it came to parents' night and reporting back, we used the children's learning journey as a way of reporting back all the assessments that had taken place, the well-being of the children, all of them are included, and we certainly didn't specifically look at the SNSAs as a way of reporting to parents. I think had we in any way prepared the children, it would have made them more aware that it was happening, and it might have made them not present as well for the assessments as we wanted them to. So we didn't have any particular preparation, we didn't feel it was needed. Particularly for the first lot of SNSAs with our primary ones, we had quite a mix of range of needs across the school, and we had quite significant needs in the school. We had children with autism, children with global delay, children with speech difficulties, and a lot of those children are supported on a daily basis by support for learning workers. We made the decision that every single child would be assessed. We would at least let them have a go at the assessment, and we used the same support that we would have as we would in school. So the support for learning workers who would normally work with those children, they were with the children during those assessments as well. If we felt they needed concrete materials to in some way support the assessment, we gave them those concrete materials. So we didn't want to make it any different from the day-to-day learning that took place for those children. They were working on computers, which they had done previously. We made the same adjustments that we would have on any other day for those children in order to ensure they were supported in the assessments. Initially, when the SNSAs were introduced, I sent a deputy and some of the teaching staff along to the training. When they came back, they cascaded the training to the rest of the staff during one of the collegiates, so they could see what the assessments looked like and how they would be carried out when the time came. During the assessments, we didn't have a huge amount of difficulty. The children were all given their passwords. On one occasion, a child lost an assessment, and when we contacted the help desk, it was retrieved quite quickly. There was also children who joined our school during the time of the assessments taking place, but again, when we contacted the help desk, those children were added on quite quickly, so we found the process certainly very straightforward. The children are so used to, as I say, particularly in primary one, but across the school, being assessed on a daily basis. So when the process actually took place, when we were ready to assess the children, all the children were aware of that day was that either the principal teacher or the deputy head teacher in the infant department, who they were very familiar with, were coming into the class to do some work with them on the computer. That wasn't out of the norm for those children, because the deputy head and principal teacher both are in those classes for non-class contact time. So the children in no way felt that anything different was happening. They are used to being assessed on a daily basis as well. We very much took the lead from the children. So the assessments, if we felt they needed a break during it, we would stop and let them return to it at a later time. If we felt actually after a couple of questions, no, this is too much or they can't cope with it, we stopped the assessment right away as well. There was nobody in any way, or none of the children were distressed in any way during the assessment, and I think as a school and as a management team and as a staff, we would never allow that to happen. So if we did in any way foresee that happening, we would have stopped that, we would have preempted that. If there was children who we thought would have been particularly stressed during it, we wouldn't have put them through it in the first place. The children actually enjoy using technology in the school, and probably a lot of the children preferred using the computer than they would to doing a written test. So actually for some of our children it was a preference to them to use the computer, but certainly in no way did we feel that it was any different to a normal day for them in school, or did they in any way know that it was an assessment that was being carried out. The challenges probably for most schools and for us initially was the lack of desktops that we had in the school and the lack of iPads that we had in the school. We had bought some iPads in, there was 2 desktops in every class, but we knew we had to make do with what we had. So all of the children were assessed using desktops. In primary 1 that was more difficult because the children required a wee bit more support, but in primary 2 to 7 it wasn't, because there was 2 desktops and the children were timetabled just to go on the desktop and carry out the assessment, with support further up if they needed it from support for learning workers or class teachers. Within the infants, the very small issue that we had was that children are so used now to using tablets and iPads, and the experience they get on the desktop is probably not as much as previously, so they found the manipulation quite hard of using the mouse. And quite often they knew what to do, but they couldn't quite figure out how to get the mouse to point and to drag something down, so some of them needed support with that. The other, and it wasn't an issue to us, but the other, we have a large percentage of EAL children within the school as well, so 30% of our pupils are EAL. So the language some of the questions could be difficult for them to understand, but again, as I said earlier, we put the same support in for those children as we would, so the EAL teacher sat with those children during the assessments and gave them as much support as she could to carry out the assessments as well. For the primary 1 children, the assessments didn't take any longer than half an hour. For some it took a much shorter time than that as well. Again, if we thought the children were getting tired, depending on the kind of day they'd already had, or depending what time of day they were doing the assessment, we maybe only did part of the assessment, then sent them back, and then we carried out the other part at a later time, but certainly no more than half an hour for any of the children. And if it was taking any longer than that, there was maybe a reason why, and we were stopping the assessment prior to that anyway. So probably about 25 minutes to half an hour for the assessment. So I think first of all, we're in one of the Glasgow schools that's in the first rollout to get the iPads, and certainly for us using the iPads will be much easier. So a class set of iPads will be able to be used to carry out the assessments. The only other change I would make is the deputy and the principal teacher took the lead for the assessments for primary 1s, and this year I would have the class teachers taking the lead in the assessments this time, with the principal teacher and the deputy there to support if needed. But the class teacher is the person that those children are most familiar with and probably most comfortable with. So this year I would have the class teachers taking over the assessments and the principal teacher and deputy there on hand if needed as well. I would continue to put the same supports in if the children needed it, and I would also continue if the EL teacher needed to sit with children or support for learning workers needed to sit with children, I would continue that as well. But the information we gained from the SNSAs justified the information probably that we already had about the children and where they were within their learning journeys. It did give a very specific view of each child. The results came back very quickly after we'd completed the SNSA, and what we did as a school was we saved the results into our desktop where teachers had access to it right away. So we didn't discuss it with staff right away, they were just able to look at the information. It gave us an idea of which children were on track, which children weren't on track, but also if there were specific gaps in children's learning. In one class in particular, it threw up for us that the children had done particularly well in number in maths, but actually the data handling hadn't been covered as well. And because we had decided to do the assessments in April, this gave us the last term to try and plug some of the gaps and to try and ensure that the children were on track with their learning. So for us, the information, we already had a lot of the information, but it gave teachers confidence in what their judgments were. As a head teacher, I'm very aware of what's going on in classes, and I trust completely the professional judgment of the teachers. But certainly I think the teachers had more confidence during tracking meetings and talking about their children's learning journey because they also had this information to back it up. I suppose for us moving forward, the SNSA, as I said, has given teachers a bit more confidence. And whereas before teachers were coming into tracking meetings and lacked confidence in talking about their children's learning and talking about where the children were on their learning journey, I think it certainly has gave staff a bit more confidence. And I think this year again it will give them even more confidence. That's not just the SNSA, that is obviously all the other assessments that are going on as well. But it let teachers look very closely at each child to see where the gaps were in their learning or where they were having difficulties as well. It helped us as well with future planning, so we could look at the planning for the next term, and specifically why we chose April as well. We knew that if there were major gaps within the learning, then we had the last term to look at trying to to bring back some of that, to plug those gaps in their learning as well, and to create targets for the last term for those children as well.